Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Parsons and today I'll be talking about captioning. So today we're going to discuss captions. We're going to look at some examples, we're going to look at some of the benefits of captioning, and we're also going to talk about ways that you can advocate for captions. First, let's go ahead and define captions. The National Association of the Deaf has a wonderful definition of captioning, and to summarize it, it's basically saying that captioning is the process of converting the audio content of a piece of media into a visual, text-based form of whatever can be heard. That also includes things like sound effects and music description, anything that would give the full context to whoever's reading the captions. Now, there are two different types of captions that it's important to know the difference between. The first are open captions. These are always displayed and they can't be turned off by the user. You might also hear them as burned in. Closed captions can be turned on and off by the user. Subtitles translate the source language into a different target language. Usually we see this with foreign languages. Captions use the same language, so if the media is presented in English, a caption will be a written form of English. So let's talk a little bit about the history of captioning. The National Captioning Institute, or NCI, provides an amazing brief history of captioning, but we're going to make that brief history even shorter, just hitting the highlights. So on February 15th of 1972, the first demonstration of closed captioning occurred at what was then known as Gallaudet College, and it really proved the viability of closed captioning by sending an encoded and perfectly timed signal with a television broadcast signal. However, it would only work on special TVs with decoders. Now, by the 1980s, a decoder could be used to receive these closed captions on an average television, but a decoder would cost about $250 from Sears, and the average TV only cost $200. We skip all the way to 1982, and we see the first real-time captioning event, the Academy Awards, which were captioned by a court reporter. Breezing right on through the 80s, we come to the 90s, when the Television Decoder Circuitry Act requires all television sets 13 inches or larger that are sold in the US to have a decoder built into them. Also in 1990, the Americans with Disability Act makes captioning an auxiliary aid, which is a huge step, but it's not enough. That's why in 1966, the Telecommunications Act requires digital television receivers to also contain caption decoding technology. Again, a huge step, but there's a lot of barriers in the way. Some of which were addressed in 2010 when the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act updated the federal laws to increase access by updating laws created during the 80s and the 90s for modern technology. Basically now, if things were broadcast on television and then later put online, those captions that were used on television would have to come over into the online space. That's great for things that aired on television, but still doesn't address content created directly for an online space. However, in 2012, the National Association of the Deaf sued Netflix, and a federal court decided that under the ADA, online-only businesses may not discriminate against people with disabilities. This meant that it required online streaming services to provide closed captions. However, this wasn't a federal law, it was just a precedent that was set. But also in 2012, the FCC began to require closed captioning for programming delivered through the internet. But again, this really only handles content that was created for television or for news media. This doesn't address consumer-created content like things on TikTok or social media or where we go to get entertainment or information. So let's talk about some of the national organizations that are involved in captioning. I could honestly spend an entire presentation talking about these three organizations and the resources that they provide, but we just don't have that kind of time. We already briefly touched on the National Captioning Institute and some of what they've done in the past. The Described and Captioned Media Program, or DCMP, has a mission to make learning materials accessible to deaf students. their entire goal is for deaf and blind students to have access either through captioned or described media. They have so many tools and resources to not only help educators by providing them access to high quality resources, but they also provide a lot of training and information. The Closed Captioning Activism and Community, or CCAC, is a fantastic group that does so much, and I can't recommend enough that you go check out their website. So let's talk a little bit about the requirements of captioning, such as when are they required? So captions are only really required for television programming when it appears on television and when it moves onto an internet format, and when it moves onto the internet, and places of public accommodation, which, as we know from NAD v. Netflix, includes streaming platforms. In fact, the NAD has an agreement with many of these streaming platforms, but there is no formal law requiring the platforms to caption. There's been a lot of lawsuits that have established a precedent for online entertainment as a place of public accommodation under Title III of the ADA, but no law has been written or altered cementing these precedents, and it does present a loophole that thankfully no streaming platform has chosen to use. When we talk about public accommodation, we also see things like theme park television sets, waiting rooms, classrooms, things like that. Captions are not required for radio, music, and podcasts. There's a fantastic case that is currently in the works. Kamala Jones versus Gimlet, with Gimlet being a Spotify company. And depending on the outcome of this case, podcasts could have to be captioned under the same precedent as streaming services. DVDs for sale or rent and commercials less than 5 minutes also don't have to be captioned. This also includes video games. They don't have to be captioned either. Streaming platforms, again, we talked about this. Technically, they have no legal requirement to caption, and also online-only content. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, they're working to make universal standards. But again, there's no laws. These are just setting precedents and guidelines and best practices. So let's talk a little bit about the financial responsibility. Captions can be expensive. There's a lot that goes into making them accessible and a lot of training required for professional captioners. The financial responsibility ultimately belongs to the creators. However, there are incentives and aids such as federal grants and federal tax credits for providing captioning. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools and best practices. So let's look at the 4 FCC guidelines. They are accuracy, synchronicity, completeness, and placement. Accuracy refers to the idea that everything that is audible should be captioned exactly as it's presented. There should be no additional paraphrasing or censoring. Synchronicity asks that we make sure that the captions appear at the same time as the sound or the words, that everything should be matched up. The only time when synchronicity is allowed to have a little bit more leeway is with live programming. There's usually about a 10 to 15 second lag time with live presentations. Completeness refers to the fact that from beginning to end of a presentation, it should be captioned all the way through in a consistent manner. That means names should always be spelled the exact same way. Punctuation should also be consistent throughout the program, and there shouldn't be portions of the program that aren't captioned. Finally, that last guideline is placement. This means that captions shouldn't block important information on the screen, whether that's titles, names, faces, important objects in the background. None of it should be blocked. The idea of captions is not to take away from the visual aspect of a presentation, but rather to add accessibility to an otherwise inaccessible presentation. So here we have a list of best practices, and for the most part, these just make sense. Here we can see 2 different examples of captions. Which is easier for you to understand? Here are 3 amazing tools that you can use to subtitle your own work. So Amara is a free online tool that allows you to caption any video on the internet, whether it's on YouTube or Vimeo or some other place. All you need is the URL for the video, and you get to listen to the video and type the captions. It's a bit of a long process, and the synchronization tool is a little bit funky and takes a minute to get used to, but it's a great way of adding accessibility to some of your favorite videos. Subtitle Edit is another program that you can use to create captions. Now, this program is not as user-friendly, but it has a lot of different tools. It will let you know if the line length is too long, if the duration is too long, so it's got a lot of checks and balances in it. If you're interested in captioning, it's totally free and open source as well. I know we all talk about how YouTube's automatic captions are atrocious, and really they are. But did you know that you can go in and edit your own automatic captions to make them high quality and fit the guidelines that we just mentioned? You can go in and you can change the timing, you can edit them, correct spellings, and make sure that they're consistent all the way through. It might be time consuming, but it's a way to make sure that your content is accessible for all. So let's take a look at some captioning fails, successes, and creative ways of approaching the problem. Now let's look at an example from a recent news story. Take a listen and recognize the fact that captions here lag a few seconds.
I think we're looking at all of the ways that we might be helpful, not just in terms of this particular crisis, but also as we look at how do we support the opposition in Belarus that has been so effective against Lukashenko? Support the opposition in Belarus that has been so effective against Lukashenko.
Especially in news stories, accuracy is key. Suddenly, the story became about the opposition and Belarus. And what has been so effective? We don't know if we're relying simply on the captions. This happens far too often. The next time that you're watching the news, turn on captions and see how accurate they are for you. Next, we're going to look at TikTok. TikTok has an automatic caption feature for any of their creators. All you have to do is press a couple of buttons and it will automatically generate captions. You can then go in and edit them for accuracy. But here we have a hilarious video with no captions. Let me know if you can tell what's going on in this muted clip that I've included here. So did you pick up on the fact that he is the FBI agent inside of your phone? Or the fact that he was talking with another individual before they appeared on the screen? Probably not if you've never seen this clip before. This is why captions are so important. They help to provide context, especially on a platform like TikTok or Instagram Reels, where context is given inside of the video, and oftentimes it's left until the end. So if programs like TikTok and Instagram Reels provide auto-captioning software, why don't more creators use it? Well, for a lot of reasons. Some creators just say they don't have the time to caption all of their videos. It takes too long, and oftentimes auto captions are so inaccurate they have to edit the entire video. Others say that it takes up too much space on the screen, while others simply say they're boring and they don't want to include them because there's no creativity in it and it makes the aesthetic different. I'd like to propose the argument that captions can actually add to a creator's work. And in fact, I'm about to show you an example of a creator on TikTok who does an amazing job of making sure that captions add to her pieces. Let's take a look.
It is autumn. ¡Cállate! My husband is caught in the backyard, so I decided to bless him with my company, even though he does not deserve me. I have arrived! Good job! Yeah, that's enough.
Now, is this a fantastic example of captioning that the FCC would be proud of? No, definitely not. However, this is an example of how when there are no regulations for captioning, lots of creators take creative liberties with them. We can understand what's going on, so from an accessibility standpoint, the goal was met. We understand what's going on, and without regulations, this has become the creative standard on places like TikTok and Instagram Reels. For example, let's take a look at the example of the bird in her video. For those of us who can hear the bird, we know exactly what she's calling out to. However, in her captions, she includes a bird emoji to let anyone who can't hear know she's calling to the bird. She's not simply speaking to herself. This is the way that captions can be used creatively to create art. Captions can be used contextually as well as literally, especially in creative pieces. This style of captioning definitely comes with its own set of problems, especially if creators don't understand how to contextually create captions. They might make absolutely no sense to somebody. For example, autumn without the leaves would mean nothing if we couldn't understand autumn. Between literal captioning and contextual captioning, creators have no excuses for making their art inaccessible. So now let's talk a little bit about video games. To be clear, there are absolutely no industry standards on providing closed captioning for video games. However, in most modern titles, you will find subtitles. Now remember, back at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about the difference between subtitles and captions, where subtitles are simply a translation and captions provide accessibility. Do you see the problem? These subtitles aren't meant to provide accessibility. They're supposed to enable someone to understand what's being said, which in and of itself is an element of accessibility, but it's not the whole picture. Most video game companies will focus their attention on subtitles for the cinematic portions of the game, as long as you've enabled them inside of the settings. Now, not every video game publisher does this. Some have done a really great job of adding subtitles to other elements of the game, but they're not all like that. But other information needs to be captioned as well. Things like if footsteps are approaching you and from what direction are they approaching you from? Has the music changed because an enemy is near? Or can you hear the growl of a dragon somewhere in the distance? All of this provides vital context, and most publishers don't caption these portions of the game. However, a lot of the modern games that have come out in the last couple of years have been making steps towards accessibility, but again, we're not there yet. Look at this example from Assassin's Creed. This is a character standing on top of a building, listening to the characters down on the ground having a conversation. Can you read those captions? Because I struggle with it. The contrast does not exist. The captioning and subtitling situation in video games definitely isn't ideal, and we're certainly not there yet. But I would definitely say that the video game industry is looking at accessibility and sees the value in it. There are certainly obstacles, and there are definitely companies out there who don't support accessibility as much as they could. However, I do see great strides in the video game industry as it continues to grow and as it continues to change. The prioritization of accessibility gives me hope that maybe someday we'll be able to have games that are available to all. Whatever your hearing level, whatever your abilities are, that games will become a universal medium. And I think that's something that we should support and that we should encourage from the video games that we play today. So let's talk about this new field of social media that first started with Clubhouse. So Clubhouse is a social media app based on the idea of sharing live conversations. When the app first launched in March of 2020, it was by invite only and gave individuals an opportunity to participate in conversations with some of their favorite celebrities. Oprah's even on the app. With the voice-based app, you'd think that captions and accessibility would be at the forefront of the developer's agenda. Wrong. The app has been around for over a year and a half with no captions or accessibility for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. At its release, it was against Clubhouse's terms of service to use outside transcription or live captioning, including CART systems. So Clubhouse got a reputation for actively denying access to users. As of the latest update, these policies have been removed. In fact, Clubhouse just announced on November 19th that automatic captions are finally available on iOS only. The app is currently nominated for the Google Play Awards and, as of the beginning of November, was in 4th place. Remember, this was before captioning was even announced, and as of right now, Android users have no access to captioning. Spotify recently announced their own version of Clubhouse called Green Room. It's currently in early access, but again, no captions are available on the app yet. This new kind of social media with no regard to accessibility is disheartening. Connection should always be accessible, and for social media companies to actively deny access is wrong. But unfortunately, as I've mentioned a few times, most online media is not regulated and not required to be captioned, especially if it's from independent creators using a platform, like those who use Clubhouse or Green Room. So the National Center for Biotechnology Information looked at over 100 studies on captioning and found that overall, captions have a significant impact on the way that we learn, our literacy levels, and our ability to focus as well. Captions are universally beneficial. So now that we understand where captioning came from, let's talk about how do we advocate for captioning. If it's so important, how do we make sure that people know that we want them? Well, there's a lot of different ways. If the captions aren't correct, contact the creators. Local news stations, online videos, school videos, and streaming, there are lots of different ways to get in contact with them. In fact, if you Google captions are wrong on Netflix, you'll actually find an online form that you can use to fill out and tell Netflix, hey, your captions aren't right. If captions don't exist, ask for them. Leave a comment or send a message to your favorite content creator. If it's an online video, leave a comment or, again, reach out to the creators. And if it's a school video, talk to your teacher or talk to the accessibility department on campus. You can also take an active role. The first and easiest way to do this is to make sure that you caption your own content. Everything from your Instagram story to your TikTok videos should be captioned. You can also support deaf and hard of hearing friendly creators. If someone takes the time to caption, leave a like, leave a comment, let them know, hey, thanks for captioning this media. I really appreciate it. And also spread awareness. And I'd like to challenge you to go a day without sound. Mute your television, your computer, your phone. See how accessible or inaccessible the things that you interact with every day truly are. So, we've come to the end of this presentation, and I hope that you have sort of absorbed these 3 key points: what the difference is between open and closed captions, what the NCI is, and what the 4 FCC guidelines for captioning are. And thank you for coming to this presentation. I really appreciate your time and hope that you learned something from it. I hope that you'll also become an advocate for captioning and accessibility in all of the media that we choose to consume. Thanks.